True toxic ex stories. Relationships can be beautiful and fulfilling, but sometimes they can spiral into nightmares, leaving scars that last far beyond the broken heart. These 5 true stories of toxic exes reveal the disturbing and sometimes terrifying side of love gone wrong. Brace yourself as we dive deep into experiences that will make you rethink what you consider normal in relationships. Story 1. The ex who pretended to be a hero but was a monster. It began innocently enough. 2 friends, laughing together, pushing and shoving as a way to pass the time. He was charismatic, funny, always the center of attention. She had always felt safe around him, like they were just 2 people enjoying the carefree nature of youth. But little did she know, the play fighting he initiated, always in the spirit of fun, would soon turn into something far darker. At first, she thought the roughhousing was harmless. A joke, maybe. Just 2 friends pushing each other's boundaries in the way friends often do. But as the days passed, something didn't feel right. She would find bruises on her arms, sometimes on her legs, and even though they were small, the pain lingered much longer than it should have. It wasn't just an accidental bump or a playful shove. It was calculated. The way he would pin her against walls, his fingers digging into her skin with a force that was far from friendly, made her stomach twist with unease. The tickling started next. What seemed like a silly, harmless game was actually a mask for something far more sinister. At first, she laughed, because that's what you do when you're told to laugh, right? It was funny, in a twisted sort of way, the way he would beg her to massage him. And when she refused, he would pin her to the ground, tickling her until she couldn't breathe. It felt like he was trying to break her, but she didn't want to believe it. The laughter, his and hers, was just part of the game, she told herself. But deep inside, she could feel something shifting. The more she resisted, the more forceful he became. His hands on her neck, his body pressing down on hers, trapping her in a corner. He would tickle her relentlessly until she could no longer catch her breath. And if she managed to push him away for a moment, he would trap her again. She learned, through the countless moments of struggle, how to fight back against someone bigger and stronger than her, how to break free from his grasp. But no matter how hard she fought, it always felt like there was something worse coming. She didn't realize it then, but she was being conditioned to stay quiet, to accept this as normal. Every time she tried to speak up, he would twist her words, making her feel like she was the one in the wrong. Her friends didn't understand. They saw the bruises, yes, but they brushed them off as part of the game. It's just roughhousing, they would say. It's what guys do. They couldn't see the sinister undertones, the manipulation that was creeping into everything he did. He was making her doubt herself, making her believe she was overreacting to the abuse. He laughed it off, telling her she was just being dramatic. He called it fun, and she started to believe him, because if she didn't, she was the problem. But one day, everything changed. It was a hot summer afternoon, and they had been hanging out as usual. She was lying on the floor, trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. Suddenly, he was on top of her again, pinning her down. She had grown used to the physical dominance he exerted over her, but this time was different. This time, there was no laughter in the air. His hands didn't move to tickle her. They moved straight for her throat. His fingers wrapped around her neck, cold and calculated, squeezing tighter with each passing second. She couldn't breathe. The world around her started to fade into a blur as panic gripped her chest. She struggled, hitting at his arms, but it was as if he was a wall she couldn't break through. His laughter, so familiar, echoed in her ears as he tightened his grip. She couldn't speak. She could barely move. The sensation of her life slipping away felt like it was happening in slow motion. Her mind screamed for her to fight, to do anything to survive, but her body was betraying her. His eyes were filled with something she couldn't place. a mix of amusement, satisfaction, and cruelty. In that moment, she thought she was going to die. She thought he might actually kill her. The thought was terrifyingly real. Her hands flailed, trying to pry his fingers off her neck, but they wouldn't budge. She couldn't make a sound, couldn't find the air to scream. She fought harder, desperation building inside her. Somehow, through sheer will, she managed to twist her body, using her legs to roll herself over and break free. She gasped for air, her throat burning, her chest tight. He just sat there smiling at her as if nothing had happened. The next day, she tried to push the memory away, chalking it up to a terrible moment of anger, his, not hers. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw the bruises on her neck. The marks left by his hands were unmistakable. And when she texted him, telling him about the bruises, his response was chillingly dismissive. "Oh, sorry, my bad." The words were empty, almost as if he had forgotten the horror of the night before. He hadn't meant to hurt her, at least that's what he claimed. But deep down, she knew better. It wasn't an accident. It was a test to see how far he could push her. And this time, he had gone too far. She tried to walk away. She tried to sever the connection, to tell him she couldn't do it anymore. But he just brushed it off. His response was cold, almost nonchalant. That's understandable. It was as if he didn't care at all, as if he had already moved on, leaving her to deal with the emotional aftermath. But the truth was, she couldn't forget. She couldn't erase the fear that had flooded her veins when he had choked her, the terror of realizing that her life had been in his hands. What she didn't realize at the time was how much control he had already gained over her, how deeply ingrained his manipulation had become. She was scared to leave because she didn't know what he would do next. She had become so accustomed to his abuse, to the cycle of love and fear, that she didn't know how to break free. But as the days passed and the bruises faded, she began to see the truth. This was not love. This was control. And she was no longer willing to be his prisoner. It wasn't an easy journey, and it took months for her to finally gather the strength to cut him out of her life. But when she did, it was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was free. And even though the scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal, she knew one thing for sure. She would never let anyone, no matter how charming, no matter how manipulative, hold that much power over her again. This wasn't just a story about abuse. It was a story of resilience, of a woman who, despite everything, found her strength and walked away from the darkness. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but one that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Story 2. The stepmom who made her life a living hell. When her father married his ex-wife, she was just a little girl, too young to understand the complex dynamics of adult relationships. She was filled with the innocent hope that this new woman in her life might be like a big sister. But she couldn't have been more wrong. What had initially seemed like a welcome addition to her family quickly turned into a nightmare that would shape her future in ways she could never have imagined. In the beginning, the stepmother was calm, almost kind in the way she tried to fit into their family. But soon, the mask began to slip. What appeared to be an attempt to blend in turned into strict, iron-fisted control. Her stepmother's authority was oppressive, and her rules were like chains wrapped around her every movement. Each morning began with the same jarring ritual. The stepmother would march into her room, yank the blankets off her body without warning, and demand she get up. The cold air hitting her skin was a signal that another day of torment had begun. It wasn't the waking up early that hurt the most. It was the constant threat of punishment that loomed over everything she did. The smallest mistake, the tiniest deviation from the stepmother's perfect schedule, would be met with cruelty. If she didn't get dressed in time, the stepmother would twist her fingers out of place, causing searing pain that made her gasp for air. She tried to tell herself it was just a mistake, a moment of anger, but the bruises on her fingers and the searing pain in her chest told a different story. There was something deeply wrong in this house. It wasn't just the physical punishment, it was the way it seemed to haunt every aspect of her life. Her stepmother's cruelty knew no bounds. On more than one occasion, the young girl would feel the sharp sting of her stepmother's toenails digging into her skin as she crushed her toes underfoot, a chilling reminder that nothing she did was ever good enough. One day, after making a simple mistake while getting ready for school, her stepmother lost it completely. In a fit of rage, she grabbed the nearest object, her wooden hairbrush, and smashed it across the girl's face. The force of the blow left her dazed and disoriented. The brush splintered in her hands, and a red welt immediately began to form on her cheek. Her father never noticed. The physical violence was cruel, but it was the emotional abuse that truly shattered her. Every day felt like a test, an invisible battle between herself and the woman who had claimed to love her father. The stepmother's ability to manipulate situations and twist her words to make her feel small was a skill she had honed over the years. At family dinners, the girl would feel her stepmother's cold gaze on her. And then, out of nowhere, her stepmother would make cruel comments about her appearance or intelligence. She'd pinch her neck just hard enough for no one else to notice, leaving her in silent agony as her friends and family chatted, completely unaware of the torment that lay beneath the surface. And when she tried to speak out, to ask for help, her voice was drowned out. No one believed her. Her father, the one person she thought would protect her, was oblivious to the way his wife was slowly crushing his daughter's spirit. Every time she tried to explain, to beg for understanding, the stepmother would spin the story in her favor. The girl was the problem. She was too sensitive. She was rebellious. She was just trying to get attention. Slowly, she began to doubt herself. Was she crazy? Was she imagining things? Why did no one see what was happening to her? It wasn't just physical pain that scarred her. It was the silent isolation, the feeling of being trapped in a world where no one could hear her. Her stepmother had masterfully twisted everything to make her feel like an outsider in her own home. But deep down, the girl knew that this wasn't the life she was meant to live. The tipping point came one fateful evening. After another long day of strict rules and cruel punishment, the girl reached her breaking point. She could feel her spirit dying with every passing moment. The stepmother's relentless demands were no longer something she could endure. This time, she didn't want to comply. She wanted to be free. She refused to get up when the stepmother demanded it, refused to follow the rigid rules that had governed her life for years. Her defiance was met with an explosive reaction. The stepmother's eyes narrowed, her voice low and menacing as she told the girl that if she didn't follow her rules, she would never be welcome back in the house. The words were cutting, but they held no power over her anymore. She had spent years in this prison, waiting for someone to see her pain, and now she knew that if she didn't take control of her life, no one would. With trembling hands, the girl packed her bags. The sound of clothes being shoved into her suitcase was a symphony of liberation. She walked to the door, feeling her heart pounding with each step, her body filled with a mix of fear and relief. But as she reached for the handle, the stepmother's voice echoed one last time. "If you leave now, don't ever come back. You won't be welcome here anymore." For a moment, her heart wavered. Could she really walk away? Would she ever be safe again? But then, she realized something that changed everything. She had the power to choose. She had the power to leave. With one final, defiant look, she stepped into the unknown, leaving behind the nightmare that had been her childhood. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew that anything was better than living another day in that hell. The years that followed were hard, lonely at times, but they were also liberating. It took time, and it took help from people who truly cared, but slowly, the wounds from those years began to heal. She learned to trust again, to believe in herself, and to understand that the past didn't define her. But there would always be a scar, a reminder of the woman who had tried to break her. And every now and then, she would think back to that moment when she finally walked out the door and smile, knowing she had found the courage to walk away from a life of hell and start anew. Story 3. The ex who pretended to be sweet but was a stalker. At first, Tom seemed perfect. He was charming, smooth-talking, and thoughtful. Everything she thought she wanted in a partner. When they met, she couldn't help but feel drawn to him. His sweet words and gestures made her feel special. He remembered the little things, like how she liked her coffee, or how she'd mentioned a book she was reading. He was attentive, always eager to spend time with her. In the beginning, it felt like the relationship of a lifetime. But over time, things started to shift, and what once seemed like kindness began to reveal a much darker side. At first, his need to know where she was and what she was doing seemed harmless. Everyone loves attention in a relationship, right? But soon, Tom's questions began to feel less like genuine interest and more like control. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she was talking to, what she was doing. He would send multiple texts, back to back, asking if she was still at work, why she hadn't responded, and who she was hanging out with. At first, she thought it was flattering. Who doesn't want someone so invested in them? But as the texts and calls became incessant, the constant pressure started to feel overwhelming. The first signs of real trouble came when he started showing up uninvited. She would make plans with her friends, only to find Tom waiting outside her house when she arrived back. "I just wanted to see you," he'd say, his voice sweet and apologetic. But it felt wrong. Why couldn't he just let her have space? Still, she brushed it off, thinking maybe she was overreacting. But that was the first crack in the facade. The tipping point came when, after a simple night out with friends, he bombarded her with angry messages, accusing her of not caring enough to kiss him goodbye. She had no idea that something as simple as leaving a party could set him off. It was a fun, casual night out, nothing more. Yet, when she didn't give him the attention he expected, he lashed out, accusing her of not loving him. His texts were filled with emotional manipulation. Phrases like, "If you cared, you would have kissed me goodbye, and why do you treat me this way?" The guilt began to seep in, and she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow she was always doing something wrong. Every time she tried to explain, he twisted her words, making her feel like she was the one at fault. Soon, the relationship had morphed into a cycle of arguments, apologies, and more arguments. Every time she tried to do something independently, he would accuse her of neglecting him. He would shower her with sweet words and apologies when she pulled away, making her believe that he truly loved her. But his love was suffocating. It was possessive. It was controlling. And eventually, it drove her to the breaking point. The final straw came when she realized she couldn't keep living like this. She tried to break up with him, hoping that this would finally end the nightmare. But his reaction was chilling, almost surreal. He threatened to take his own life. His desperation was palpable, and she was paralyzed with guilt. She had to walk away, but how could she? How could anyone ignore someone threatening such drastic measures? The emotional manipulation was so intense it left her questioning everything. Was she being selfish for wanting to live her own life? Could he really be so unstable that leaving him would drive him to something horrible? Despite her efforts to distance herself, Tom didn't go quietly. His behavior escalated even further. He began showing up at her workplace unannounced, standing outside her office, staring at her from across the room. He would leave gifts and notes on her car, pleading for another chance. When she ignored him, he started sending emails to her parents, telling them that she had abandoned him, that she was breaking his heart. And it didn't stop there. He began contacting her neighbors, telling them twisted versions of their relationship. He painted her as the villain, trying to turn everyone against her. It was like she was living in a nightmare she couldn't escape. No matter how many times she blocked his number or changed her social media accounts, Tom found new ways to invade her life. He would create fake profiles just to reach her. He even sent messages through mutual friends, asking if anyone had heard from her. It was exhausting, the constant fear that he might show up wherever she was, no matter how much distance she tried to put between them. The real horror, though, came when he began spreading false stories about their relationship. He told anyone who would listen that she had been cruel to him, that she had cheated, that she never loved him. The lies he spun were so elaborate, it seemed like everyone around her was questioning her integrity. People she had once called friends started pulling away, unsure of who to believe. The social isolation was painful. She tried to clear her name, but no matter how hard she tried, the narrative he had crafted kept growing stronger. What hurt the most was how he twisted everything to make it seem like he was the victim. He wasn't the guy who was obsessive or controlling. No, he was the misunderstood lover, the poor soul whose heart had been broken by a girl who didn't care. He even went so far as to cry in front of mutual acquaintances, playing the part of the broken man left in the wake of her cruelty. The more people he convinced, the more powerless she felt. She couldn't fight the lies that were being spread about her, and she couldn't escape the constant reminders of his obsession. The fear that he might never leave her alone took a heavy toll on her mental health. She felt like she was being suffocated, trapped in a web of his creation. The Tom she once knew, the sweet, thoughtful man, had turned into a toxic, manipulative stalker who couldn't take no for an answer. And the worst part was that he had made her feel like she was the one who had destroyed everything. But eventually, after months of terror, she found the courage to fight back. She went to the authorities, filed restraining orders, and began telling her story to anyone who would listen. It wasn't easy. Tom's influence had spread so far that it felt like she was fighting an uphill battle. But the truth was on her side, and she eventually found the strength to break free. It wasn't the end of the story. There would always be scars, lingering fears of what he might do next. But she learned an important lesson. Love shouldn't feel like a prison. She deserved better, and she would never let anyone have that much control over her again. Tom's obsession was toxic, and no matter how many times she cut him out, he found a way to return. But she had learned to take her life back, piece by piece, and that was the victory she held on to as she moved forward. Story 4. The girl who lied about everything and almost destroyed a friendship. From the moment Amanda entered her life, everything seemed too good to be true. She was charming, sweet, and always wanted to be close, as if their friendship was something special. The kind of friendship that felt like it could last forever, full of shared laughter, late-night talks, and dreams of the future. But soon, something began to feel off, like an unsettling shadow lurking behind her perfect facade. Amanda's behavior was bizarre, and at first it was easy to dismiss her quirks as just part of who she was. She was quirky, sure, a bit needy at times. But who wasn't? At first, the need for attention seemed innocent, even endearing. She would want to spend all her free time together, constantly texting and calling, eager to hang out. But the more they spent time together, the more it became clear that Amanda wasn't just seeking attention, she was demanding it. The moment she felt that attention slip away, or that someone wasn't paying her the focus she craved, she became unpredictable. Her sweet demeanor would disappear, replaced by an aggressive and manipulative side that could send chills down anyone's spine. One night, after the victim rejected Amanda's advances for more attention, something as simple as not returning a text quickly enough, Amanda's reaction was shocking. She threatened to call the police, accusing her friend of mistreating her. It was a low blow, and it didn't make sense to the victim. It wasn't like she had done anything wrong, yet Amanda was pulling out all the stops to get the sympathy she desperately needed. The victim didn't understand where it was coming from, but in that moment, it was clear. Amanda was willing to destroy a friendship just to maintain her hold over her. Eventually, the victim had to take a step back, cutting off contact with Amanda by blocking her on everything. It seemed like the only way to escape her toxic presence. But as time passed, Amanda's actions only grew more intense, more desperate. The drama didn't stop with the block. She began weaving lies, fabricating stories about past trauma, making it sound like she had been through unspeakable abuse, all for the sympathy and attention of those around her. She manipulated everyone, friends, acquaintances, even strangers, into believing that she was the victim of life's cruelest injustices. The victim knew better, though. Amanda's stories were always a little too perfect, a little too convenient, and the inconsistencies in her narrative started to add up. But she kept quiet, trying to distance herself from Amanda's chaos, hoping it would all just blow over. But life has a funny way of bringing people back together, no matter how hard you try to escape them. 2 years later, they crossed paths again, this time at college. The victim tried to ignore the unease that crept up her spine when she saw Amanda in the hallway. It was like stepping into a time machine. Everything felt eerily familiar. But what she didn't expect was just how much more outlandish Amanda's lies had become. This time, she was pretending to have children. Not just one child, but 2. The victim could hardly believe her ears when Amanda casually mentioned her kids in passing conversation. But the most shocking part, Amanda went so far as to claim the victim's best friend's child as her own. She wove an elaborate story about motherhood, about her children's personalities, about the struggles of raising them. The victim was flawed. She knew Amanda didn't have any kids. She had never even heard her talk about being pregnant. And yet, there Amanda was, spinning a tale so unbelievable that even the victim's friends began to question her. Was Amanda really that delusional? Had she invented a whole life of children just for attention? But it didn't end there. Amanda's manipulation was escalating. The lies she told about having children were just the tip of the iceberg. She began to play a game of psychological warfare, turning the victim's world upside down. When the victim finally confronted Amanda, asking why she was lying so boldly, Amanda's response was chilling. She didn't own up to anything. Instead, she turned the tables completely. She played the victim, accusing her friend of attacking her, of being jealous, of not supporting her. In an instant, Amanda became the innocent party, and the victim found herself as the villain in her own story. What followed was a web of deceit designed to isolate and confuse everyone around her. Amanda didn't just want to control the victim. She wanted to destroy the relationships she had. She targeted her closest friend, Marcus, using lies to cause a rift between them. Amanda spread rumors, twisted stories, and whispered manipulative words to anyone who would listen. She made sure that Marcus, once the victim's strongest ally, began to doubt her. Slowly, she planted seeds of mistrust and confusion, all while maintaining the guise of someone who was just misunderstood. It was maddening. Everywhere the victim turned, Amanda was there, poisoning the air with her lies and manipulations. She was playing a dangerous game, and it was almost as if she took pleasure in watching people's lives unravel. She was like a shadow, always lurking, always plotting the next move to regain control over those she targeted. No one was safe from Amanda's toxic web, and the victim could only watch in horror as her life became increasingly tangled in Amanda's chaos. The victim had to take a stand. Enough was enough. She had to speak the truth, confront Amanda one last time, and make it clear that she would no longer allow Amanda's lies to destroy her life. But the confrontation didn't go as she had hoped. Amanda, true to her nature, played the role of the poor, misunderstood soul. She blamed everyone else for her actions, all while spinning a perfect web of deception to cover her tracks. The worst part, the victim had to learn the hard way that Amanda's manipulation was far more dangerous than she had realized. It wasn't just about the lies. Amanda's need for control had grown so intense that she was willing to sacrifice everything, including friendships and the truth, just to feed her own need for attention. The victim finally saw Amanda for what she truly was, a master manipulator, someone who would go to any length to hold on to power. In the end, the victim did what she had to do. She cut ties with Amanda once and for all. It was a painful decision, as cutting someone out of your life is never easy, but it was the only way to regain control. The lies, the manipulation, and the chaos would no longer be a part of her life. And as for Amanda, she would continue weaving her web, but it would be with fewer people to entangle. The victim had learned that sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to walk away, even if it means leaving behind someone you once thought was a friend. Story 5. The toxic relationship that took over his life. This story revolves around a man whose life was overtaken by his ex-girlfriend's toxic and obsessive behavior. What started as a seemingly normal relationship quickly turned into a nightmare that consumed every aspect of his life. Her name was Amanda, and at first she was everything he thought he wanted: charming, affectionate, and filled with love. But soon, the truth began to reveal itself in ways that he couldn't ignore. At first, the attention she showered on him seemed flattering. Amanda always wanted to know where he was, what he was doing, and who he was with. Initially, he thought it was cute. She was just interested in him, right? But as time went on, it became clear that this was no longer about affection. It was about control. She would stalk his social media accounts obsessively, constantly checking for signs that he was interacting with other women. Any comment or like on his posts from someone of the opposite sex would send her into a jealous frenzy. Amanda's accusations of cheating were endless, despite him never giving her any reason to doubt his loyalty. She would twist every situation, making him feel guilty for things he never even did. Every argument was the same. She would accuse him, demand answers, and when he tried to explain, she would manipulate him into believing that his actions were the problem, not her overreactions. She created chaos in his life, always keeping him on edge, unsure of when the next outburst would happen. But it wasn't just her jealousy that was consuming. It was her constant need for attention. Amanda made sure he knew that he was never allowed to have his own space. She demanded his attention at all hours of the day. Anytime he tried to make plans with his friends or family, she would throw a fit. She would guilt him into cancelling plans, making him feel like a terrible person for wanting to spend time with anyone other than her. She used emotional blackmail as her weapon, saying things like, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't be leaving me to hang out with them." The relationship was a constant roller coaster of highs and lows. One minute, everything would seem fine. Amanda would be sweet and loving, promising that things were better than ever. But the moment he stepped out of line, even in the smallest way, she would threaten to leave him. The pattern was predictable. A big argument, followed by her threatening to break up with him. Then, after a few hours or days, she would come back, apologizing, saying she was just so emotional, and he would believe her. This cycle repeated itself over and over, and each time it wore him down a little more. He became so deep in the cycle of manipulation that he started to lose himself. His friends saw what was happening and tried to intervene, urging him to see that this wasn't healthy, that he deserved better. But he was too tangled in the relationship to listen. He was so emotionally drained, confused, and isolated that he couldn't recognize the damage being done. His world had shrunk to just Amanda. He couldn't see how much he had lost, how distant he had become from his friends, how he no longer had the energy to care about anything except making sure Amanda was happy. He started to question his own worth, feeling like the problem wasn't her. It was him. The emotional toll it took on him was immense. Amanda wasn't just controlling his time, she was controlling his mind. Every day, he had to second-guess his actions, worried about how she would react. There was no peace, no quiet moment to himself. Her presence consumed him like a shadow that never left. The arguments drained him emotionally, and the constant threats of her leaving him had begun to chip away at his self-esteem. He wasn't the person he used to be. He was a shell of himself, constantly trying to keep her happy and avoid triggering another fight. Finally, the inevitable happened. Amanda did leave him. She stormed out, claiming that he wasn't good enough, that he hadn't changed enough, and that he hadn't proved his love to her in the way she demanded. For the first time in years, he was alone. The silence in his apartment was deafening. He should have felt relief. After all, it was over. The constant tension was gone. The manipulations were over. But instead, all he felt was an empty ache in his chest. Her absence should have been freedom, but it felt like a void he couldn't fill. The relief didn't last long. The emotional scars from the relationship were deep, and they didn't heal overnight. There were moments when he would catch himself looking at his phone, waiting for a text from her, even though he knew it was over. There were nights when he would replay her accusations, her manipulative words in his mind, questioning if he had truly done something wrong. He had spent so much time trying to make her happy, trying to meet her needs, that he had lost track of who he was. It took time, months, even years, but eventually he began to realize that the damage she had done wasn't just about the fights or the manipulation. It was about how she had stripped him of his sense of self. The healing process was long, but with the support of true friends and time away from the toxic relationship, he began to rebuild. He learned that the scars from toxic relationships aren't always visible to others, but they are always there, festering beneath the surface. He learned to rediscover his own worth, to understand that no one should ever have that much control over his life again. Though he had lost so much during the relationship, his confidence, his friendships, his peace of mind, he came to realize that leaving was the first step in taking his life back. The relationship had nearly destroyed him, but now he was free to rebuild, to redefine himself, and to make sure that no one would ever again have the power to manipulate him the way Amanda had. He had learned a painful but invaluable lesson. Toxic relationships are not just about the visible signs of abuse. They're about the subtle ways in which people can take over your life and make you feel like you're not good enough. But the scars may fade with time, and freedom is always worth fighting for. Conclusion. The stories we've explored are more than just tales of toxic relationships. They are powerful reminders of the insidious nature of manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. Each individual in these stories was affected deeply, not only by the actions of their toxic partners, but by the way they were made to question their worth, their emotions, and their reality. These relationships took away more than just love. They stole confidence, peace of mind, and a sense of self. And while these stories are filled with heartbreak and pain, they carry a profound lesson. No one deserves to live in fear, confusion, or manipulation. If you find yourself trapped in a relationship where you are constantly doubting your value, or where your needs and boundaries are ignored, know that you are not alone, and you do not have to stay. Toxic relationships often trick us into believing that we are the problem, that we aren't worthy of better treatment, but that is not the truth. You deserve respect, you deserve to feel heard, and above all, you deserve to be loved in a way that lifts you up, not tears you down. The fear of being alone or the pressure to stay because you don't want to hurt your partner or disappoint others can keep us stuck in harmful cycles. But these stories show us that staying is not the only option. Leaving a toxic relationship is incredibly difficult, but it is also the most empowering decision you can make for your future. There is always help available, whether it's from friends, family, or professionals who can guide you through the process of healing and rediscovery. You are stronger than you think, and breaking free from the toxicity is not a sign of weakness. It is a courageous step toward reclaiming your happiness. Every person who found the courage to walk away from a toxic relationship in these stories was faced with a difficult journey, but each of them found a way to rebuild, to heal, and to come out stronger on the other side. Let these stories inspire you. You do not have to settle for less. Choose a life where your happiness isn't defined by someone else's emotional needs, where your voice is heard, and where your peace is preserved. You are worthy of a healthy, respectful relationship. One where love is not about control, but about mutual growth and understanding. Never forget that you have the power to choose who stays in your life and how you are treated. Breaking free is not just an escape, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Don't let the scars of the past define you. Let them remind you of your strength, your resilience, and your ability to build a future where you are truly happy and at peace with yourself.